Welcome to Sustainable Futures, the sustainability podcast from Kantar, the world's leading marketing, data, and analytics business. In each episode, we speak to senior experts from a wide range of disciplines to bring understanding to complex topic areas and to shine a light on pressing social and environmental issues facing businesses. These podcasts are designed to enable marketers to create sustainable futures for brands. Welcome to the Sustainable Futures podcast. This episode is taking place in the context of International Women's Day 2025, which has as a theme for all women and girls, rights, equality, empowerment. So today, we'll reflect on how marketers can do their part through their work. For example, how can inclusive advertising erase biases and lead to equality and empowerment for all women and girls? And who can better discuss this with us than the interim head of the UN Women's Unstereotype Alliance, Elspeth L'Anson. Hi, Ellie.
Hi, Valeria.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great to be here.
We are celebrating International Women's Day, contributing with insights. How can insights create better understanding and empowerment for women? Can you share with us a little bit about yourself and your role within the UN Unstereotype Alliance, please?
Sure. So I am currently the interim head of the Unstereotype Alliance. And for those who don't know what that is, it is a collective of leaders in the advertising industry who are convened by UN Women with a shared vision to eradicate harmful stereotypes from advertising and media content. So we have been established since 2017, and I have been at the Alliance myself for the past 5 years, working on this program, and I sit within the private sector partnerships division of UN Women with a goal to work with the private sector to elevate women's empowerment and gender equality throughout the private sector. Previous to that, I had many years in the advertising industry. So I started in media agencies and then moved to several different brand side roles in different global organizations.
What a wonderful career and such a purposeful career as well. Congratulations on your trajectory. And I have to say, the work of the Unstereotype Alliance is more important than ever. Mm-hmm. Because today we see how diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are being challenged. So it is critical that we remind marketers that inclusion is a strong force that fuels brand growth. And inclusive marketing is expansive marketing. So in this context, I would love to hear from you how inclusive advertising delivers better results. You just released a study called Inclusion Equals Income. And why is this so important? What is the role of inclusive advertising in generating more gender equality and empowering women?
Sure. So first, I will describe what we call inclusive advertising for the purpose of this conversation. So inclusive advertising really is content that is devoid of stereotypes, which is obviously central to the work that we do at the Alliance. And it represents our full communities authentically and positively. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about inclusive advertising. And it's so important for gender equality and inclusion more broadly, because we know that the way people show up in advertising drives perceptions, and perceptions drive norms and how we behave and how we act in society. And that's why UN Women really decided to convene the Unstereotype Alliance, because of the power of the advertising industry in the way we tell stories, the way we present content and show people up in different stories. And that's why UN Women convenes it, because of the power of changing beliefs and perceptions. But it's not just that. Inclusive advertising has this other side, if you like, and that's really about what consumers want to see. And we have been tracking content with Kantar since 2019 using the gender unstereotype metric, which is a pre-test measure that looks at gender portrayals in advertising content. And what we have seen since 2019 is that consumers react very well to inclusive advertising. And that measures both men in content and women in content. And we see that over time, this is becoming more and more important, and higher scores result in much more beneficial outcomes for brands as well. But I'm sure we'll talk more about that later on.
I don't know if you remember that in one of our podcasts with the Unstereotype Alliance, we discussed the Barbie movie.
Yes, I do.
Well, that movie is a great reference for some of the gender dynamics which we see at play today.
Yeah.
In fact, I would argue that today we are living in Ken's world. And it seems some advertisers think that's so and are reverting to some of old formulas. We saw that Victoria's Secret's show, for example, had this big hair and high heels. We also did some analysis of the Super Bowl advertising this year. And what we found is that there are fewer women in leading roles. Only a few advertisers, Dove, Nike, the NFL, Novartis, had strong messages of empowering women, almost as if they knew there was a void, almost as if they knew some were stepping back. So from your perspective, how do you think women are feeling today? And what do they expect from brands and from advertising today?
Yeah. So like I said, we've been tracking using the gender unstereotype metric for several years. And at the end of 2024, we did see a slight drop-off of women being shown in leading roles. That's when men and women are both in a piece of content together. But then we did also see that women are still having a lot of speaking time, and when it's just a woman in the ad, they're showing prominently. So we haven't seen too many warning signs at the end of 2024. But I think, aside from looking at representation alone, what we like to do with the data from the unstereotype metric analysis is to see what is driving high scores, positive portrayals as indicated by high scores. What are the key drivers? And if we can go back on history, we know that non-traditional roles are way more impactful than traditional roles. So I would say at this point in time that would remain true. So I'll explain some of the kind of key drivers that we see, because this is the case for portrayal of men and portrayal of women. So the key drivers for strong portrayals of men include not being shown in a traditional role, being shown as caring, also sharing screen time with women. Excuse me. Those are all key drivers that constitute high scores for male portrayals. Interestingly, caring is really not as important to female portrayals at all. That comes much lower down in the kind of key drivers list, if you like. But what is important is things like diverse body sizes, showing women with confidence, women having prominence in the story. So I think it's really important that we're looking at not just representation, but how they show up. And you can see from those couple of examples that consumers don't want to see stereotypes. They don't want to go back to these traditional roles. So I think it's really important that we have that in mind now, because that is what has been driving growth up until this point. And I don't see that changing.
That's very promising. Good to hear. And good for advertisers to hear this, that there is no consumer demand to see more of Ken's world.
Yeah.
Right? Well, thank you so much for giving us the data. I think data is really the strongest argument here. During these challenging times, we should go back to what do consumers want and expect from brands, and how do they want to see themselves represented. And this is also what we heard in a global study we did in 2024, our first global brand inclusion index. We found that 75% of consumers worldwide say that inclusion influences the purchasing decisions they make. So influences what brands they choose. So we could say that inclusivity is a global business imperative. And with this, obviously there are challenges. How do you do inclusive marketing globally? What would you say are some of the challenges and the opportunities there, and what is your guidance in terms of global inclusive marketing?
Sure. So I'll start with the opportunities. So the Inclusion Equals Income study that we did recently shows that universally consumers react very well to inclusive advertising, and it drives sales. And I'll come on to talk about that more later. But we looked at a whole range of different countries, a whole range of different sectors, and however the data was cut, the same effects always came out. Inclusive advertising drives that positive commercial growth. So we know that there's that universal expectation and appreciation, if you like, of inclusive advertising. But it is important to have in mind the local context, because what is deemed inclusive in one market might not necessarily translate well to another market. So we really have to take a nuanced approach to inclusive advertising. It has to be locally specific, particularly when we're thinking about stereotypes. It has to have in mind the cultural context and the local context. And at the Unstereotype Alliance, we have 12 national chapters for that very reason. You need that local expertise to be able to tackle local stereotypes and issues on the ground. So that is a really key element. But, wherever you are in the world, inclusive advertising resonates, which was just great to see. There really was no fluctuation, no differences between markets, between categories. But I recognize it is sometimes a challenge, and sometimes brands face backlash. That is a reality. But fear of getting it wrong shouldn't hold brands and marketers back, because of all of the many reasons I've discussed already, the benefits that can be reaped from inclusive advertising.
To that point, the many benefits, can you talk a little bit about what motivated the study you're referencing, the Inclusion Equals Income study? You conducted the work with the Oxford State Business School, right?
Yes.
And, what led to it? Can you tell us a little bit about the history?
Sure. So we have been releasing a report called the State of the Industry Report for several years. And what that looks at is how the advertising industry is progressing across three areas. So how unstereotyped and inclusive advertising is showing up, how the industry is fostering workplace equality, and how consumers are reacting to this inclusive advertising approach. And what we found from our last two reports is that we were seeing a slowing down of progress, or at least less reporting. And that was of concern to us. So, we've seen the benefits from the work that we've done with Kantar on the gender unstereotype metric data. So we were confused as to why this was slowing down. But what we thought was, we have all of this fantastic predicted ROI data from the gender unstereotype metric. We already saw that when you have high scoring ads, you see a higher predicted ROI. So we went into this with confidence, thinking, okay, we already have this good basis. How can we build upon that? Because we need perhaps more concrete, irrefutable data to put into the hands of marketers, because we know that, sometimes predicted ROI might be seen as more of a soft metric. So we wanted to take that a step further and see, actually, does this convert into sales? What is the commercial impact of this? So that was really what drove the study.
And what type of methodology did you use to get to the results?
So with the support of Oxford University Side Business School, as you mentioned, they conducted the analysis. We pulled data from the Kantar gender unstereotype metric data, because we have this huge wealth of data already available. It's well established. And we also leveraged 5 of our Unstereotype Alliance members to help feed into the study. So it was an analysis across 58 countries, 392 brands, and it was over 4 years. So data between 2020 and 2023. And the data that we used to examine inclusive advertising was the gender unstereotype metric, as I said, but also Gina Davis Institute's GDIQ was also part of it. And then we also looked at brand value, and that was using Kantar Brand Z data. And then finally, the good stuff, if you like, the sales, that came directly from the advertisers themselves, as well as Kantar World Panel and Nielsen IQ. So a really robust,
super robust methodology and very global.
Yes.
Very impressive.
Yes, thank you.
So with that setup, tell us about the results.
The moment we've been waiting for.
Did it meet your expectations, and was there anything surprising at all?
Yes. So, we went into this expecting that we would see this positive link because of the previous data that we had. But I think it's fair to say none of us were expecting just quite how positive it was, which we were delighted about, of course. So we saw, I'll just give you some of the headline stats. We saw that inclusive advertising drives short-term sales, which we didn't know if this would have an impact. We had our kind of mindset on longer term growth and impact, but we weren't as sure about short-term sales impact. But we did. We saw a 3.46 immediate uplift when you see inclusive advertising. And that longer-term sales uplift is 16.26%. So
double digits.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. We were delighted to see that. So, we see that short-term and long-term sales uplift. But we also looked at other dimensions because, brand equity measures are crucial to commercial growth and health of a brand, as you know very well. And we saw some other key statistics coming out of this report. So 54% greater pricing power, which is just enormous. Consumers are willing to pay more for these brands that have inclusive advertising. We also saw 15% higher loyalty and 33% stronger consideration. So not only is it having this short-term effect, but once you have those consumers, they will be loyal to you if you continue with your inclusive advertising. So it really, really was compelling evidence, and absolutely thrilled that was the outcome, because we didn't know what would happen.
Fantastic outcome. It's a way of differentiating brands.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That is great to hear. Resounding evidence on the power of inclusive advertising, which means advertising effectiveness is linked to inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So given this evidence, what advice would you give to advertisers in terms of how to implement inclusive advertising?
So first of all, I would say those that aren't considering it, that is a very risky strategy, particularly when you think about that customer loyalty statistic I was just mentioning. But in terms of how to do that, how to implement best, I think really it's starting with intention, and it needs to be something that is an approach that is taken over time and consistently applied. And we've seen successes of Unstereotype Alliance member brands who have been doing this for some time. But it really does require that intention, but also it's a whole system approach, if you like. It has to be embedded into your processes. It needs to be considered in the relationships with your brands and agencies. It needs to be considered when you're working with underserved and underrepresented communities. It's something that needs to be built into the entire ecosystem. But what we did find really interesting, again, from the report, is that most of the pieces of copy that were included in the analysis were business as usual advertising, if you like, kind of price and device, not necessarily a big purpose-led brand campaign. There were some of those, but the majority were business as usual, if you like. So it needn't be too convoluted or too, too much investment is needed to achieve this. Just by simply having no stereotypes in the portrayals of people in your stories and having this inclusive approach that shows your full community in all their glory, that really is what hits the mark, and that's what consumers want to see, and that's what they react well to.
That's something we also found in Kantar's Brand Inclusion Index. We asked people, about how they want to see themselves represented, and the overall theme was always about genuine representation.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, women are very tired of unrealistic ideals of beauty, of ageism, of colorism. Basically, quote after quote, women discuss how they don't see themselves accurately represented by advertisers. So if you could give marketers and advertisers guidelines on how they can positively represent gender today, what would you say?
So I would point them to a framework that we have at the Unstereotype Alliance, which is called the 3 Ps. And the 3 Ps stand for perspective, personality, and presence. So presence is all about who is included in the story or who's not included in the story. Perspective is all about through whose eyes are the story being told. And personality is all about the agency of the characters. Are they shown as multi-layered, multifaceted? Do they have agency? So that framework, the 3 Ps framework, is a really simple way to embed kind of checks and balances across the creative development process. So from brief through to creative development, through to casting, it's something that helps sense check. Has a stereotype appeared? Has it arisen? But then also, if you're working to represent underserved communities or underrepresented communities in your content, work with those communities in the development as well, because that really is the only way to have an authentic representation and understanding of their lived experiences, if that's something you're trying to reflect in your story. So there's frameworks, there's other other tools and resources out there that can help for these checks and balances, but working with communities is incredibly important. And consistency, I mentioned it briefly a moment ago, but the brands that we work with who have been doing so well in various different categories have been consistent with their approach and stayed true to their values.
That theme of consistency is one that I think we need to emphasize today, as it seems that the political climate might deter some marketers from this long-term vision on inclusion. And that's something that we also saw in the Brand Inclusion Index when we asked people to choose the most inclusive brand in their eyes. We saw this theme of commitment and as well as bravery. So that combination of being there in a consistent manner. In fact, the brand that was chosen as the most inclusive for women was Dove. And the reasons that many gave was that they were the pioneers on women's sense of self-esteem, of confidence, of empowerment, but they saw that as a historical theme, not something that was just a blurb. So in your eyes, what is Dove doing right, and what do they know about women and girls that other brands might be overlooking?
So I'm not surprised that Dove takes that top spot, because as we spoke about briefly there, consistency is absolutely crucial, and that's something that Dove has been doing for over 20 years. And I'd just like to mention that Dove is a member of the Unstereotype Alliance, so we've worked very closely with them and understand some of the journey that they have been on over those 20 years. So consumers really recognize when brands have these kind of commitments and they trust them. And I think what Dove has done, and other brands who have had similar success, is they have listened to their consumers. They have taken these long-term, multi-year approaches, and that really does pay off. And we know that from, not just the strength of these brands, but other consumer data. And Edelman put out their trust barometer just recently. And again, this is a theme that reappears time after time. Consumers are looking to brands to stay true to their values, and they will support those brands, and they'll support them with their purchasing power. So I'm not surprised Dove has taken that top spot, because they have been absolutely consistent and unwavering on their position on real beauty. Reiterate what consumers are demanding of brands is a really helpful thing to do. And Dove has just been incredibly consistent in their work. And as I said, yes, listen to their consumers. But that expectation from brands is something we also saw from the State of the Industry report, similar to the study that you've done. There is that demand, and consumers will step away if you step away. And there is a loyalty element to understanding that these brands are here to support you. And when they stay the course, consumers will.
Thank you for that, Ellie. Obviously, here we're giving our listeners all the data, all the arguments to stay strong and maintain these commitments and long-term vision on inclusion. And it is critical, as you pointed out earlier, that is embedded in the overall strategy right from inception point. And that shapes how advertising is executed. That, implementation needs to be impeccable to avoid backsteps. So to end today's episode, I would love for you to talk to our audience and give your message to advertisers making decisions in today's environment, navigating all the challenges. What would you tell them in terms of maintaining course?
First of all, I would say turn to the data, particularly from the Inclusion Equals Income study, because it's brand new data. It has that link from inclusive advertising directly to sales, which we know resonates with decision makers across organizations. And share that data, share it internally, share it externally, speak about it at any opportunity, share it widely, because, it's the irrefutable data that we need at this moment to continue with inclusive advertising. And I know this is easy to say, but try to not be distracted by the noise, and turn back to the data, because it really is a compelling and irrefutable story. I've said that several times, but it really is.
It is.
And prepare for backlash. I think it's something that we have to prepare for at any time. It's good practice, but particularly now. And speak to your stakeholders, have them prepared, speak to all of the people involved in the campaigns that you're making, have protocols in place if backlash does occur, have guardrails, and speak about what might potentially happen. And if it does, stay the course, because that's what consumers expect. And if you step away, like I said previously, they will step away and they will vote with their purchasing power or not. So really, really do stay the course is kind of where I would finish.
Thank you, Ellie, for that inspiring message. With that, we're going to close today's episode. That was Ellie L'Anson from UN Women and Stereotype Alliance. Thank you for listening.
You have been listening to Sustainable Futures, Kantar's sustainability podcast. I hope our episode gave you new insights on the intersection between brands, people, and social and environmental sustainability. Join us next time and continue to learn how marketing can create a fairer, greener future. And don't forget to subscribe in your favorite podcast platform for new content coming soon.